In this video, we'll be going over things that we would love to see a reintroduction into World of Warcraft. As a game that has spanned over 20 years, with growths and declines in the player base, there are numerous items, systems, rewards, and activities that have been fundamentally lost in time. Whether it was finding a player with a unique weapon or a very cool mount, finding out it is unobtainable doesn't feel very motivating. So here is a list of items that should find a way back into the game for new players to experience the joy of working towards obtaining them. Coming in at number 10, it may surprise a few people, are removed quest and dungeon rewards, as it has already made somewhat of an appearance through Dragonflight's patch 10.1.5 and 10.1.7 respectively. In Dragonflight as well was an introduction of Dawn of the Infinites, with its quantum items dropping from mythic Chrono Lord Dios. These quantum weapons and armor, as well as a mount, were a way to obtain removed items and items that were never implemented. However, the one exemption, besides challenge modes of course, were quest source IDs, or in broader terms, removed quest transmog. A lot of these quests were likely removed with the Cataclysm expansion, with the world revamp and changes to many sources of the unique transmog. This was rectified with Dragonflight patch 10.1.7 adding back rare and world drop transmogs inherently tied to specific zones, and rare spawns with their unique items added back onto the loot table. Unfortunately, this was only with world drop items. With the patch 10.1.5, Scholomance and Naxxramas were re-added, along with very interesting and engaging storylines and content to unlock. The technology is absolutely there to not only re-add the transmog, but include it through time walking, anniversary, or the small little storylines like the Scarlet Monastery of Old, Scholomance, and Naxxramas. Understanding system limitations, and a slight bit of effort going into coding a functioning quest system, a reintroduction would be great for collectors, as there are unique and interesting pieces locked behind a removed quest line in the world or dungeons no longer accessible. Blizzard did a wonderful job with this by adding dead mines through classic time walking during the 20th anniversary event, leaving the same ID items to be obtained indefinitely so long as classic time walking is up for the week. An example of a bad introduction would be the Burning Crusade time walking, and instead of just reusing the same appearance ID, a separate ID was created for time walking, feeling clunky in terms of collections, and cluttered ID numbers from the Burning Crusade to the current expansion. Think of how many same appearance items have upwards of 5 separate IDs. The reason this is brought up is because of the quantum items mentioned a bit earlier, in that they don't give an appearance based on which appearance you're missing, and rather which ID you're missing. This makes it harder to obtain any item you may specifically be looking for, as it'll go through all the different variations of weapons or armor you already have, but a unique source. Adding back quest rewards, of which all quest rewards are unobtainable from quantum items, and much harder to obtain removed items from old dungeons, rare spawns, elites, and bosses. A quick example of old dungeons are Upper and Lower Blackrock Spire, Razorfen Crawl, and Sunken Temple. With the addition of Scarlet Monastery, Naxxramas, and Scholomance, it added back old, removed content in a refreshing way. New old content is never a bad thing to add to an ever-growing MMO, which is why this places at number 10. At number 9 are old pre-patch event rewards. Specifically, think of Burning Crusade, Wrath, and Legion. While there is some hope for the Legion remix to include a reintroduction of the pre-patch weapons and armor, other events such as Mists of Pandaria, World of Draenor, and much further back, with most notably Wrath, seem very unlikely to have transmog rewards re-added. To start with an explanation on why re-adding pre-patch event rewards has already happened, and why it wouldn't be terrible if Blizzard continued with adding back noteworthy pieces. With the Mists of Pandaria remix event, there was a bug with the scenario, Theramore's Fall, in which completion of said scenario on a level 35 character would reward the feat of strength, Theramore's Fall, and mail either the Theramore Tabard or the mini mana bomb depending on faction. This was later noted, and a hotfix was added to purchase both the Tabard and toy on remix characters for bronze. While this was initially locked to just remix characters who purchased the Tabard, after remix ended and warbands were introduced, the achievement was turned into a warbound unlock, and any character could talk to a Tabard vendor and obtain a Theramore Tabard copy. While these two toys were exclusive for approximately 12 years, the remix event allowed a new avenue of obtaining old and sought-after appearances and items. While a Burning Crusade, Wrath, or Warlords of Draenor remix is far out and entirely uncertain, there are still other means of introducing appearances with minimal impact on accessibility. To talk more about the blessed gear of Undying Slain, there are currently ways to obtain a few select pieces of the set. The first one is from Trial of Style. There is Ensemble Mana Etched Regalia that rewards Blessed Gloves of Undying Cleansing and Blessed Mantle of Undead Cleansing, Both of these cloth items were previously only obtained in the Wrath pre-patch, and later introduced again in Legion's patch 7.2.5. The second one was added most recently with the revamped Burning Crusade time-walking vendor choices, Ensemble Shadowmoon Warlock's Vestments. Despite being a cloth ensemble and only showing that it grants cloth cosmetic armor, since the Blessed Gauntlets of Undead Slain are shared appearances with the cloth gloves, Shadowmoon Warlock's Glove, the appearance is added nonetheless. The leather and mail sets from Undead Slain have not shown up anywhere, as of yet, nor have any of the main pieces with the Judgment Paladin recolor. It would be a wonderful addition to Wrath of the Lich King Time Walking, a remix in the far future, anniversary event, or what Blizzard did with the Scarlet Monastery and allow for a small event to take place that would reward the Transmog. As with the 10th entry, so many unique pieces of frankly regrettable Transmog have been lost and forgotten. Iconic specifics like Merc Blood's Vampiric Battling and Arcanite Ripper, Teldrassil's Hippogriff Undercity Plaguebat, and more niche pre-patch rewards like Tabard of the Argent Dawn or Tabard of the Protector. All of the FOMO tied to pre-patch events has fallen away, especially when it comes to pieces that no one really remembers. There's not really much left to find a thrill in seeing out in the world when you don't really know what it is anymore. When is the last time you've seen someone with the Staff of Balsavon? Would you recognize it even if you saw it? These questions are why the pre-patch Transmog is ranked at number 9, since yes, there are memorable Transmogs and items. There are also fewer and fewer people who have them, and with a growing number of added alternative obtaining methods, there really is no reason not to add back pre-patch items. Speaking of fewer and fewer people, coming in at number 8 are the extraordinarily rare Old School Ride mounts. These mounts include the Alliance's Black Ram, Frost Ram, Icy Blue Mechanostrider Mod A, White Mechanostrider Mod B, Palomino, White Stallion, Ancient Frostsaber, and the Night Saber. For the Horde, the mounts are Arctic Wolf, Red Wolf, Green Kodo, Teal Kodo, Ivory Raptor, and the Molted Red Raptor. A bit of a history of these mounts first, since they're over 20 years old. And to make a lot of people feel even older, high school kids who played vanilla back in 2004 likely have high school age children now. With this uncomfortable bit of knowledge out of the way, the old school rides were the original Swift riding mounts, purchased with Exalted with your race's main faction. Since they were unarmored and basically just recolors of the non-Swift mounts, Blizzard felt it was necessary to find a way to differentiate the Swift mount from their less speedy counterparts, and created the still obtainable Swift variation. When they did this, they offered anyone who had purchased one of those mounts to trade in for a new and shiny armored version. It wasn't mandatory, and people did elect to keep their former mounts instead of upgrading. Thus, the feat of strength, Old School Ride, was born. Because of how few people have been able to afford a Swift mount, and even less deciding on keeping their mounts, the basic mounts have become incredibly rare by doing so. Unfortunately, again, which was stated previously, some of the mounts are so basic that it's near impossible to differentiate between the original version and an added recolor some 14 years later. Examples of the Icy Blue Mechanostrider Mod A versus Blue Mechanostrider, Green Kodo versus Frightening Kodo, and Swift Azulian Panther versus Night Saber. While the prestige and rarity of the old school rides weighs heavily on Blizzard's want to reintroduce any sort of method of obtaining, it feels like more and more there are great opportunities to obtain old and removed items, and to keep a good circulation of content, especially in an MMORPG. To give a bit of defense to this argument, there is a whole other game mode dedicated to reliving and experiencing vanilla WoW as it was, or with a fresh light. This could be an excellent opportunity to allow for cross-game play to gain retail rewards, and it hasn't been necessarily bad before. Take the example of the Frostbrood Protoworm. This was a Wrath of the Lich King Classic promotional reward granted by just playing through the Death Knight starting area for a limited period of time. Accessible in the sense that both Classic and Retail WoW are on the same subscription, and there is no need to purchase anything to be able to play on Classic servers. To make the obtaining of an old school ride mount feel like less of a giveaway for free, players who want to obtain the mount in retail should be required to grind it out as it was in the original vanilla game. Or if utilizing Classic's engine for an evergreen acquisition method is far-fetched, a long and grindy questline can be added in retail. For example, Naxxramas Tier 3 reintroduction outside the Black Market Auction House required someone who already had a full set of Tier 3, Drop Dead Gorgeous, and old profession crafts made relevant once again. An excessive gold sink, time sink, or a mix of both would be a wonderful way to reintroduce the old removed mounts back into the game. Of course, taking into account its rarity, which is why one of the best ways if they were to re-add the old Swift mounts, would be to include both a huge gold sink and an even bigger time sink to offset any feelings of exclusivity as they did with the Tier 3. While it is highly unlikely for these simple, yet the rarest mounts in the game, to be re-added into retail, it is still a wish list of many vanilla nostalgists and collectors alike. And at number 7 is not necessarily a set of rewards, but rather an entire game mode that has been forgotten: the Brawler's Guild. For anyone unfamiliar, the Brawler's Guild is set in either the Bismos Brawl Club for Alliance or Brawlgar Arena for Horde. It was first introduced in Mists of Pandaria's patch 5.1 and continued throughout the expansions into Warlords of Draenor for the 2nd season, Legion for the 3rd, and finally Battle for Azeroth for the 4th and final season of the Brawler's Guild. There's really no speculated reason as to why the Brawler's Guild was seemingly abandoned and discontinued after Battle for Azeroth's final iteration. It appears that with the launch of Shadowlands being the pandemic's peak and tons of Blizzard employees working from home, or otherwise in quarantine, development of many game modes sat on the back burner. Since the Brawler's Guild usually released with a 1.0 or 1.5 patch, it was not too concerning to not have news of the Shadowlands' own Brawler's Guild for a while, and yet it unfortunately never made a reappearance. All throughout Shadowlands, into Dragonflight, and to War Within, there have been no efforts made to even attempt to reintroduce the Brawler's Guild back into the game, and all invitations have since been grayed out. With its initial introduction with Pandaria, the Brawler's Guild had felt like a highly secretive and elite fight club, and had a very fun way of engaging with players who sought to participate in the Gladiator-style events. By including lucrative invitations dropping rarely or through a fun referral system, it engaged in what makes an MMO multiplayer a game: socialization. If you didn't have access to the guild, there were players who could grant you a special invitation to participate, and in turn allowing you the option to pass it on. To take a different approach from the collector-focused entries prior, the Brawler's Guild provided a fun and enjoyable atmosphere. Instead of AFKing in the capital city all expansion, it allowed everyone to congregate and have live entertainment through other players participating in the guild. The thrill of a live audience cheering you on, it truly felt like you were engaging with the real World of Warcraft. Other players chatting up and hanging out while waiting in queue for their arena turn. Nothing felt more fun than slipping down into the secret tram fight club to talk to other players and get tips on how to defeat the bosses and climb the ranks. A whole community that died away with the discontinuation of the Brawler's Guild. Think of some iconic Brawler Guild's characters: Epic Maximus, Nibla, and of course Bruce, a Crocolus who was randomly found. The old rewards could be cool added back, especially with their seasonal removal. However, the most fun aspect of the Brawler's Guild was objectively the community that was formed in and around the arena. It seems we really shouldn't hold our breaths to see if the Brawler's Guild will return or not in the near future, or past the World Soul Saga, but it would be a lovely surprise to be re-added along with all the other old rewards, including Bruce and Brawler shirts. A reason to see old and new players alike gathering once again to watch and participate in the fights, especially with the addition of the new visual update added in War Within's patch 11.1. While being such a small aspect of the game, it was sad to see it discontinued and left to gather dust after the Bruce questline. Perhaps the ethereal meddling will usher in a new future for the Brawler's Guild, or perhaps why it was mysteriously shut down. Coming in at number 6 is an entry that feels slightly strange to be on this list, and this is a combination of both Keystone and raiding achievements, or rather their mount rewards. Very well known are the two achievements, Keystone Master and Ahead of the Curve. With the recent addition of Keystone Legend in War Within 2nd season, we'll go ahead and lump all of them together. A bit of a history of Ahead of the Curve mounts, as it predates Keystone Master by 3 expansions. The very first Ahead of the Curve mount was the Kor'kron Warwolf, a reward directly from the achievement Ahead of the Curve Garrosh Hellscream 10 player, and Ahead of the Curve Garrosh Hellscream 25 player. Another difference is this was also only available on normal mode difficulty up until the launch of 6.0, and couldn't be obtained on heroic. With a later adaptation of Ahead of the Curve in Warlords of Draenor with the Grove Warden, the iconic moose mount promised by old Blizzard developer Ghostcrawler. This was later changed to be a heroic and mythic only. A common misconception about Ahead of the Curve mounts is that the mount is a direct reward from the achievement, which, excluding the Kor'kron Warwolf, is actually a reward from the boss directly. What this means is that while the ability to obtain the Ahead of the Curve achievement has been removed, the boss will still drop the mount or mount quest item up until the release of the next expansion. This has been the case for all of the Ahead of the Curve mounts. Now we'll go into the history of the Keystone Master mounts. While the iconic Keystone system was introduced with the start of Legion, there were no long-term seasonal goals until Battle for Azeroth. Up until Season 4, the Keystone Masters, Seasons 1 through 3 achievements, were purely a feat of strength, as there was no cosmetic reward tied to doing either Keystone Conqueror or Keystone Master. It wasn't until Battle for Azeroth's 4th and final season did they add both a title and mount reward for Conqueror and Master respectively. The Awakened and the mount, Awakened Mindborer, a white and red recolor of the Old God Worms resembling Gahoon. Following in tow are the Shadowland mounts, Sin Touch Deathwalker for Season 1, Soul Twisted Deathwalker for Season 2, Waste Warp Deathwalker for Season 3, and lastly the Restoration Dreamwalker in Season 4. In Dragonflight, we broke apart from direct recolors and instead has some of the worst Keystone mount rewards quite possibly ever. Hailstorm Armorodon in Season 1, Inferno Armorodon in Season 2, Verdant Armorodon in Season 3, and the best version of the Armorodon, the Infinite Armorodon. Whoever decided the Keystone mounts in Dragonflight should be flightless, thick lizards certainly made a decision. In War Within, Blizzard had gone with a slightly different Keystone mount pattern, that instead of having one mount model and slightly different variations and colors, to create unique rewards depending on the seasonal theme. Those being Diamond Mech Suit for Season 1, the Crimson Shredder Tank for Season 2, and this brings us to the third achievement in this entry, Keystone Legend. This is a new achievement added in War Within's Undermine patch 11.1, and brought with it an even higher echelon of rewards. The Enterprising Shredder Tank is a recolor of the Crimson Shredder Tank, and requires a Mythic Plus score of 3000. Prior to Shadowlands Season 2, to get the Keystone Master's seasonal achievement and mount, you needed to time all 15s. With the Season 2 change and the addition of Blizzard's own internal score, this was later changed to requiring 2000 or 2500, depending on the amount of dungeons in rotation. Both Fortified and Tyrannical were required to get full points for a dungeon. This was later changed in Dragonflight's final patch as the Keystone Squish was implemented. With all this information out of the way, it seems very unlikely to add any sort of challenge mounts back in, as they are in fact seasonal rewards. However, there could be a way to implement them similar to how the Vicious Saddle mounts are added. That, while above Keystone Master or Keystone Legend threshold, there is a bar that fills up and will unlock one additional Keystone mount of the player's choosing. Similarly applied to the head of the curve mounts as well. Meaning that despite putting in objectively less effort to obtain the mount initially, if you missed out or weren't playing during the time, the mount will be obtainable at a much higher cost, offsetting any time-limited mounts to how much time you're willing to spend grinding keys or killing heroic end-of-tier raid bosses. While this method was brushed up on with Faded and Awakened Seasons of Shadowlands and Dragonflight with Jinglewort Senior and the Voyaging Wilderling, it doesn't seem any different to allow the Ahead of the Curve, Keystone Master, and Keystone Legend mounts to be added in a similar, albeit harder way. And at number 5, we have the Elite PvP appearances, both weapon ensembles and elite sets. Prior to Legion, all of the Elite Transmog sets were a unique variation of the Gladiator PvP sets, either with different assets or colors. With Warlords of Draenor Season 2, the Elite sets became Elite recolors of the PvE raid sets, or in other words, just another recolor with mythic style effects. This was temporarily changed in Battle for Azeroth's 1st and 2nd season, Dread and Sinister, as they were developed using the Warfront Elite version, albeit colored for PvP. In BFA's Notorious season, it was returned back to the Elite PvE recolored Mythic Raid Transmog sets. It was continued to be the same iteration up until the current season as of this video. Prized. However, the method of obtaining Elite Transmogs has been changed since World of Draenor. Prior to Legion, there were no Elite ensembles. Instead, you needed to purchase the piece directly from the vendor with Conquest once you reached 2200 rating, meaning you had to grind Conquest to buy the full set, as there was no way to purchase the Elite sets after the season had ended. Unfortunately, this meant that people who didn't finish up the set, an example of not buying bracers as they're not typically visible, can no longer complete the set ever. Even with a rating, since they didn't have the eligible Conquest for purchase, they cannot be granted the appearance. This has since been changed, thankfully, as Legion brought along ensembles, and as long as you reach 2200 on the class you're looking to buy the Transmog on, it is always available to purchase. With Battle for Azeroth, Elite sets were made much more obtainable and dropped the set down to 1800, and the Transmog was added directly into collection tins. Elite weapons were also made purchasable at the respective rating until it was changed in Shadowlands to be Duelist, or 2100. It was once again changed in Dragonflight and made 2400, or Elite, until War Within had dropped it back down to Duelist 2100. With the explanation and basic background and constant seasonal additions of now 13 class sets, older elite sets are getting rarer and rarer. On top of certain classes performing horribly during certain seasons, or classes being unpopular, many sets have less than a 0.001% collection rate. Many people have never seen certain elite sets, and likely will never see them, and thus have no idea what set they'd be on the lookout for. A perfect example of this is an elite set that has already been added into the game, a full accessible elite set. The reason why the addition of this elite set hasn't been discussed, mentioned, or even noticed is just by the sheer lack of people who even remember what it looked like. Its accessibility isn't the issue, and if people had an issue with an old, removed from the game elite set being added back, it's not about it being re-added, it's about notoriety. No commotion was brought about due to its reappearance, and that was through Mists of Pandaria's iconic remix event. The elite set mentioned is the Malevolent Gladiator Satin Armor, a unique reddish-purple variant. Prior to War Within, the chest piece of the set was missing, and sometime between War Within pre-order release and Nurubar Palace, the chest was added in to match the elite set robe, meaning it is now a full, released, and obtainable elite transmog set. Because of this set's addition, either by mistake or intentional, though it seems that with the robe being added later on, this is intentional, there is no reason for all other elite sets to be obtainable in a vicious saddle method of obtaining, or by hitting 2400. And following the PvP theme are the Gladiator Mounts at number 4. While much more iconic and recognizable than the elite sets, the Gladiator Mounts have been a staple of WoW PvP rewards since their introduction in Burning Crusade. Prior to Mists of Pandaria Season 13, tyrannical Gladiator Mounts were slightly easier to get with the battle group system. To explain, Gladiator Mounts were previously rewarded to the top 0.5% of people in the battle group ladder. An example of that is there were 13 battle groups in the North American region, meaning each 0.5% in each of the 13 battle groups could obtain a Gladiator Mount. And that number was of course increased by the number of people playing during that season. With the removal of battle groups during Tyrannical, it was later the 0.5% of all players across all realms and battle groups. So instead of the top 0.5% of the 13 battle groups, it was now the top 0.5% of regional realms, in this example, North America. This system was in the game up until the first season of Battle for Azeroth, where it was changed from 0.5% of the ladder to reaching 2400 rating, and winning 50 games above 2400, though dropping below 2375 would require getting Gladiator/2400 again, and completing the rest of the wins. For some completion percentages and statistics, the rarest Gladiator mount in the game is the Malevolent Gladiator's Cloud Serpent. The most common mount prior to Battle for Azeroth change is the Vengeful Nether Drake, whereas the most common Gladiator mount in the game is currently the Unchained Gladiator Soul Eater. Like vicious saddle mounts that also rotate through seasonally, Gladiator mounts could work essentially the same. A rating above 2400 to 2700, and earn a bar similarly based on wins above the threshold. This would make it much harder to obtain an old Gladiator mount, but still have it accessible. A lot of the stagnation in PvP content recently are lackluster rewards, horrible MMR systems, and just honestly a lack of players who still engage in PvP. You cannot climb the ladder if there are no rungs to reach for. The addition of hard to obtain rewards, but still obtainable nonetheless, means that more players will engage with the content each season, even if the seasonal rewards themselves are not very good. A reason why PvP rewards, especially weapons, enchants, tabards, cloaks, and mounts, are so extraordinarily rare is because of such a high barrier to entry into the hardest content in the game. Not a lot of people, especially newer players, are willing to jump through multiple hoops just to be able to play the game, and much less grind for a mediocre reward. Adding back not only Gladiator mounts, but just old rewards in general, will allow for new and old players alike to finish a transmog they missed out on, or obtain the chaser items they're interested in, even at an equal or higher difficulty. Incentivizing the player base to engage with the content is dwindling, and despite dedicated communities and PvP resources available, it's still steadily shrinking. Reintroduction of old rewards would bring a breath of fresh air and much more content into PvP, and allow for people to obtain items they want from Rival, Duelist, Elite, and Gladiator. And if that means the removal of seasonal FOMO, there are still reasons to PvP to get the one transmog that you've been eyeing. You have to play the game to get the rewards, and it should be accessible for people who want to grind PvP. Another highly sought after entry here at number 3 are the old Legion Mage Tower weapon appearances. The Mage Tower was a solo challenge that was added in Legion's patch 7.2, with the introduction of the Tomb of Sargeras. It was an unlockable challenge that rotated between the 2 other Broken Shore building unlocks, the Command Center and the Nether Disruptor. These buildings were up for 3 days at a time, with a rest period for 1 day between each active state, and can be contributed to with Legion Fall War supplies in order to unlock access to the Mage Tower. Once the Mage Tower was built and active, to gain entry into the challenges required 100 Nether Shards per attempt. This was later changed in a patch 7.3.6 hotfix to be free entry, and the Mage Tower was permanently available to help anyone still attempting the challenges with the release of Antorus and better higher item level gear. This was also around the time when the Legendaries were increased to item level 1000. Because of the jump in gear and higher item levels available, Mage Tower challenges went from difficult to trivial depending on the challenge. Healer and tank challenges were still relatively difficult, whereas damage challenges were a cakewalk with Antorus gear. Going from a true challenge with Tomb of Sargeras, or crazy people attempting to do it with Nighthold gear, to an absolute breeze with Antorus gear, it felt incredibly easy to just outgear the challenge. With Antorus gear, it felt cheap and non-challenging, especially with the ability to just go into the challenges with minimal knowledge and just one-shot it due to scaling. While anyone who completed it pre-Antorus did in fact have a very hard challenge, outgearing the Mage Tower felt either really good or really bad. With the reintroduction of the Mage Tower in Shadowlands' 9.1.5 via time walking, it had scaled everyone down to 45, meaning there was no possible way to outgear and cheese it. The Shadowlands version of the Mage Tower was incredibly difficult. Since Covenant powers, legendaries, and conduits were disabled, it relied solely on the player's base class and power and skill level. Later on, helpful trinkets and gear builds were found to negate the scaling and gave a 1-up on the Mage Tower, but it was still very challenging. While the challenges no longer rewarded the weapon appearances, there was a new feat of strength added called Tower Overwhelming, where you completed the Mage Tower on all 36 original specs, but obtainable for everyone post-Shadowlands. It feels a bit strange to remove the weapon appearances and content, only to re-add it back later on without the original rewards, despite the content and challenge being much harder to complete. With the removal of Legion legendaries, artifact power, and non-scaling nature of the original Mage Tower, and replacing it with a harder version of the same content, it doesn't really feel prestigious in the nature of being skilled enough to complete the challenges. It was more so playing at the right place and the right time. With an expansion that is nearly 10 years old now, the prestige of Mage Towers for original players seems to eclipse the enjoyment of newer players, or people who never got around to doing the original challenges. Taking away content, adding it back with new rewards, and calling it new content doesn't feel very great without the old rewards as well. There is truly no harm in addition to rewards, and there is certainly no harm in adding back old rewards with equal or greater effort in obtaining. And at number 2 are the challenge mode weapons and armor. Challenge modes were the original predecessor of Mythic Plus, and a foundation for many timed group challenges. First introduced in Mists of Pandaria, challenge modes granted the first obtainable dungeon portals upon completion of gold timed dungeons. The 3 timed tiers were bronze, silver, and gold. All bronze dungeons rewarded the title The Undaunted. All silver dungeons rewarded an ancestral phoenix egg, which could be used to purchase one of 4 phoenix mounts. Finally, the full gold dungeon reward was a unique class-specific Transmog set. A list and preview of the Transmogs are as follows. Aside from Tier 3, some of the most subjectively iconic Transmogs belong to Mists of Pandaria, and with Classic releasing soon, many new players can get their hands on these beautifully classic thematic sets. However, they remain unobtainable 13 years later, where they have had many opportunities to reintroduce them into the game's content cycle, namely Remix. World of Draenor brought with them a new set of challenge mode dungeons as well, but instead of rewarding a classic-specific Transmog for gold, it introduced some of the best-looking weapon models in the game. It followed the same reward structures as Mists of Pandaria's challenge modes, all bronze dungeons rewarding the title, the Indomitable, all silver rewarding the Challenger's War Yeti, and gold dungeons rewarding cosmetic weapon appearances available for purchase in Ashran from Challenger's Savina for Alliance and Challenger's Sunforge for Horde. Some of the most iconic Warlords challenge mode weapons include the Great Sword of the Inferno, Soul Eater, and of course the Cloudslong Glaive. Since challenge mode rewards are in the same boat as current Mythic Plus rewards, despite the removal of the bronze, silver, and gold system, It feels just as similar as adding a way to either have them available for Mythic Plus or add challenge modes back into a time walking system, as again, additional content has never hurt the game, especially something evergreen like raiding, delves, Mythic Plus, and even world content. While exclusive titles from achieving a server first time, such as Mistwalker, could stand to be permanently unavailable, cosmetics in general don't feel great to not have an obtainable method, especially in an MMO. Skilled aspects of the game, such as mythic raiding sets, get to permanently become available. And yet challenge modes, Mythic Plus, and PvP have seasonal rewards coming and going all the time. As with every past entry, the best way to reintroduce old content is to make it much harder to obtain than previously, to add weight to people who completed it originally, and to make the current grind much more worthy of the reward. Number 1 feels objectively uncontested in both status and rarity, and that is none other than the corrupted Ashbringer. This legendary weapon was obtainable from original Naxxramas from the undead Alexandros Morgraine, before its removal in Wrath of the Lich King when Naxxramas was moved to Northrend. Prior to vanilla, Morgraine was a High Lord of the Silver Hand, and was the original wielder of the Ashbringer. He was betrayed by his own son and brought to a bitter end with his own sword. The desecration of his weapon caused it to fall to corruption. This weapon would go on to become one of the most sought after and interesting artifacts of old vanilla World of Warcraft, since due to its interactions with the Scarlet Commander, Reginald Morgraine, and High Inquisitor Fairbanks becoming more famous and well known as time goes on. It seems Blizzard has intentionally gone out of their way to make sure this iconic weapon will never return to retail WoW, at least for the time being. It was intentionally unobtainable from the Quantum Greatsword item from Dios, and neglected from the old Naxxramas reintroduction during Dragonflight, even going as far as to warrant its own blue post. Alongside AotC, the corrupted Ashbringer is the only other item from original Naxxramas that has not made a reappearance through profession crafting or the long, grindy readdition of Tier 3. Paladins during Legion did get a slightly different variation of the corrupted Ashbringer through the artifact's hidden appearance, from fishing of all things, but it is unfortunately not the same. While we are unlikely to ever see this weapon again, it would be very interesting to have it find its way into the game again, either through a massive scale secret or a multi-gold cap gold sink, or both. As with all of the additions of fun puzzles in old Naxxramas, or just the steps to unlocking all of the old content again, could make for an excellent introduction. All of the additions, Zul'Gurub, Skolamont, Scarlet Monastery, Naxxramas, and Deadmines, have been highly received, and it's always good to go back and add unnecessarily removed pieces of content, especially old dungeons and raids from pre-Cataclysm eras of the game. And with that, we end the video here. Anything talked about here is just purely for discussion of things that we wish to see added back into the game, and there's no telling what Blizzard will decide to add back. If there is anything you think we might have missed, or entries you would have preferred to be in the video, let us know down in the comments below.